Hey guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to make this card on the right using our Poinsettia Wreath card. This is for day 2 of our Insta Hops to celebrate our fall 2019 release. So I'm going to be doing some watercoloring with this large wreath stamp. But before I start coloring anything, I'm going to do some white heat embossing first onto some watercolor paper. I'm using Brutus Monroe Alabaster embossing powder. So once I've embossed my watercolor paper panel, I'm going to start watercoloring with some Ken Oliver color bursts. I'm using a wet and wet watercoloring technique to get a loose and soft watercolored effect. So what I did first was wet the entire area that I plan on painting with some clean water first, and then I dropped in some cadmium red color bursts into the inner portions of my poinsettia petals, and you can see that pigment just spread towards the outer petals. So I'm going to take a second fine tip water brush and just blend some of that pigment out to the tips of my poinsettia leaves. I'm going to repeat the process for the rest of the blooms on this panel. Since the poinsettias in this wreath aren't very large, you don't have to do a lot of special shading or techniques. Honestly, I just dropped in the pigment, blended it out just a tiny bit, and then moved on to the next until all of the poinsettia blooms were colored in. We're doing a bit of loose watercoloring here, so you don't have to stay within the lines. For my poinsettia blooms, I did stay mostly within the lines, but as I paint the leaves, the holly leaves, and the rest of the foliage on this panel, that all flew out the window. I went totally outside of the lines as I painted, and that's how you get that really soft look. Once I dropped in my Terre Verte Color Burst pigment into the inner corners or portions of my leaves, I just blended that color out. I went outside the outer edges of the leaves and I blended the color out. And I kind of went back and forth with this technique. I put down that base layer of Terre Verte and then I would go back in to add deeper concentrations of Terre Verte into the inner portions of the leaves for that additional shading, because I did want a little bit more definition in the actual leaves. Otherwise, you have a very light base color for the foliage. So once my leaves around my wreath were complete, I added some marigold into the berries on my wreath. And then again, for the marigold color burst, I went outside the lines for a softer, loose result. And here it is, completely finished. I set this aside to dry. At this point, I decided to keep this card very simple. So I just stamped the sentiment from the same poinsettia wreath stamp right into the center of my wreath with our Noir Dye crisp black ink. And then I just trimmed this painted panel into an A2 size panel, which is 4¼ by 5½, and my card is complete. And I made a couple of other cards using the same poinsettia wreath set, and you can see the different results you get by using different colors and different embossing powders. So thanks so much for watching, guys. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it regularly.